our libido is tied into all of the emotions, not just the happy ones, but the anger, the hatred, the sorrow, the pain, the grief, the loss, and the joy, the pleasure, the excitement. All of that is an aspect of our libido and our sexual energy. And when we say yes to that, that's where it starts to shift. Right? That's where it begins to change. So for me, it went from numbness to anger to grief and then into immense pleasure and full body orgasm.
I'm going to be talking to Susan Morgan Taylor today about what to do when your libidos don't match. Hi, everybody. I'm Sandy Weiner. Welcome back to Last First Date Radio, where we believe it is never too late to go on your last first date. And to support you on your journey to lasting love, I have written 3 books. My 3rd book was published in September of 2024, and it's called Love at Last, True Stories of Falling in Love Later in Life. And you can find all 3 books on Amazon for Kindle or paperback. Before I bring Susan onto the show, I just want to invite you to join my Facebook group. It's called Your Last First Date. It's for women over 40 who are interested in a positive place of support for dating and relationships. This is a really well-monitored group, which is rare in the world of groups. I'd like to welcome my guest, Susan Morgan Taylor. She's a leading somatic sex therapist who helps couples deepen their intimacy and create lasting, fulfilling connections. She has over 25 years of experience in somatic healing, and she developed the Pleasure Keys process, a powerful approach to reigniting sexual and emotional harmony in relationships. After her own personal awakening from a sexless marriage, Susan became passionate about helping other people remove obstacles to pleasure, love, and orgasm. She's also the creator of the Pleasure Keys Retreat and host of the Sex Talk Café Podcast. When she's not working, she enjoys hiking and singing karaoke in the mountains of Western North Carolina. Welcome to the show, Susan. I'm so excited to have you here.
Oh, thank you, Sandy, for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
I would love to hear more about your story of your sexless marriage, because I think so many people can relate to it.
Yes, and I would say that's really where it began for me. It was the sexual awakening that came after leaving that marriage, unfortunately. A lot of what I do now is to help people not have that outcome that I experienced with the ending of a relationship. Sadly, that's sometimes how it lands, and we don't have the skills and resources to really know how to solve that problem. So I really just, when I was in my marriage, I really have this longing for something more. Like I wanted a deeper connection. I wanted more of a spiritual connection. And very much for me, I wanted that sexually and intimately. I wanted to have that feeling that it was more than just having lots of orgasms. Like that was never a problem for me. I could have lots of orgasms. That was great, but there was just an emptiness in that. There was something missing, and I had no idea how to create. I couldn't even really put a name on it. I just knew that I wanted something different, deeper, more connected, and I had no idea really how to create that, how to get it. So I ended up doing what a lot of us tend to do, and I blamed my partner for that. I just thought, well, he's just either not the right partner, he's not a good lover, and he was trying. I'm going to give him some credit. He was actually trying to study and learn, and meanwhile, I wasn't really taking any responsibility. I just kind of put it all on the guy, right? Which I think women, we tend to do that. We're sort of conditioned to think, well, the man just has to figure it out. He's just got to come in and rock my world and know how to do it all, when we don't even know as women our own bodies, how our bodies work, how our arousal work, what turns us on, what we need, what we want. Fast forward, the marriage ended. There were other factors going on there as well. There were certainly a lot of things that kind of contributed to the sexlessness. I'd be happy to talk about that because I think it is really relevant when we talk about mismatched sex drive, specifically in women. What actually happens? I was actually the shut down one too. I want to clarify that for the listeners. I was the one that could care less about sex in the marriage. The disinterested one, the one with the less interest, lower sex drive, so to speak. So that relationship ended, and I really decided that I wanted something different. I did not want to repeat that pattern. So a couple of years after the divorce, I was in a relationship briefly where this guy came in. He had studied sexuality and claim to have all these skills and I'm going to make your body do all these amazing things. And I thought, wow, this is really it. Like I finally found a man who really kind of knows his way around and is going to rock my world. Well, he did not deliver. He did not deliver on that. And that relationship, for other reasons, just didn't last. And I had this moment of really realizing like, wow, like there's a pattern here. And it's obviously not necessarily the men in my life. It's me. I realized I had really never taken responsibility for my own pleasure, for my own body, for how my arousal even worked, for what felt good, for what I wanted. So I very quickly realized if I wanted anything different for myself, for my future relationships, if I wanted this unidentifiable more that I was craving, then I was going to really have to figure out my own pleasure and my own body and my own sexuality and really how does a full body orgasm even happen? I had heard about that. It's something I always wanted, but I kind of thought, oh, that's just for other people, or some man's going to come and like deliver this experience to me, which that guy promised, and that didn't happen, right? So I'm sitting here going, I really need to figure this out. So I made this declaration one day. And I said, I'm just going to learn. I'm going to study my body. I'm going to take time with myself. Once a week, I committed to a pleasure date, what I call a pleasure date with myself. It was like Tuesdays from like 11 till 1. I put on candles, put on music, made the room real nice and pretty. And I spent time with my body. I touched myself intimately, sexually, and started to really learn my own map, my own body. What could I feel? What did I feel? What felt good? What could I not feel? And much to my surprise, I didn't actually have a lot of sensation down there in my lady parts. I could have orgasms and such, but like there was a lot of numbness. There wasn't a lot of sensation and sensitivity. So I learned how to just be present in my body and how to feel and how to meet what was there. And from that, I had big, huge releases of emotion, anger, resentment, deep grief, and sorrow. We tend as women to store a lot of that in our sexual anatomy. A lot of this, anything we can't feel or shouldn't feel or we're taught not to feel, we shove it down, and therefore our libido shuts down, and our ability to really feel and feel sensation also shuts down. So I had this big opening that happened. But the thing that changed everything was one day, this was really not that long after I made this declaration and started this weekly practice, by the way. It was maybe only a month or so later. I was in one of my pleasure dates and I had started to be able to feel a lot more in my body. There was just a lot more energy and sensation and arousal. And I had a moment where I had a wave of pleasure that moved from the bottom of my feet, came all the way up through my body. My hands were tingling, my face was numb, and this just love and pleasure just shot out of my heart. My whole body was vibrating. And so I realized, like, oh my gosh, I'm having this full body orgasmic experience that I never thought was possible for me. And I realized that in that moment, that what I had done up to that point, I had learned how to remove the obstacles to that experience, because the truth is that pleasure, love, and orgasm, these are like natural states that we already have access to, and we can have access to them at will when those obstacles to our pleasure are moved, are out of the way, are removed. So that's kind of what I had done up to that point. A lot of it was emotional stuff that was trapped in my body and my inability to be present in my body. I had, over just the course of a few weeks, been able to kind of clear those out. So I was having this experience of realizing that these things exist within me. It's not something that anyone can give to me. Nobody can like bring me pleasure. Nobody can give me an orgasm. And love was no longer something I had to seek outside myself to find, like in men or in relationships. I realized that I am love, I am orgasm, I am pleasure. It's actually a natural state within me that I knew that I could show any potential future lover kind of how to open that within me, because I had found that pathway in myself. And so I was very lucky. Several months later, I did attract a lover into my life who was super amazing and really open and interested in learning. And, I learned how to use my voice and what I needed and asked for what I wanted. And he was all in, like, anything you would like, let me give that to you. So that was really beautiful. But I also realized how stuck we can get when we don't understand these things, and when the obstacles to those experiences are there and we don't know how to move through them, that we can blame or not take responsibility for our own enjoyment. And it can cause a lot of problems in a relationship, as it did in my marriage. that was the turning point for me when I had that realization that I want to help other women. I want to help couples really be able to resolve this. And so I turned my life's work into helping others be able to find that pathway back to connection, back to pleasure, and ultimately back to having more enjoyment and harmony and getting back on the same page when it comes to sort of the mismatched sex drives and relationships, which is really my specialty now as a sex therapist and specifically working more now with couples.
First of all, easy to blame others for any of our issues. So, once we can look inward, even if as you said, the marriage wasn't one note. I mean, there wasn't one thing wrong with it, but we choose our partners for a reason. And it's often, I would say almost always, connected back to childhood experiences and our attachment styles and all of that. And we need to work through these things in order to come out the other side. And I love how you started going on these pleasure dates with yourself and really experiencing what pleasure felt like in your body. I think many of us never experience that. We don't know what we don't know our bodies. We don't know what our bodies want. I had an ex-boyfriend from high school who came back into my life after my divorce. And we had a very, I would say, terrible communication relationship. I didn't even know if he loved me. I didn't know if I was his first. He was definitely mine. We never talked about anything, but I was so crazy about him for so many years. And when he got divorced, we started having these conversations, and it was really interesting. But he apologized to me. He said I was not a good communicator, wasn't a good lover, and he studied tantra. And he was like, "Let's get together." And he lived across the United States, so he lived on the other side. He came in for a holiday, and he got in touch with me. And I had just started dating after my divorce, and I was seeing somebody else, but I wasn't exclusive. I was very clear with this guy: "You're my new person, but I'm not ready to be exclusive with anyone." And so I was thinking I was ready to be open to this guy. And we made a plan to get together. And I remember all kinds of emotions came up, but a lot of the old, "I don't really trust this guy" came up for me. And it ended up not happening. And he's married now. He got married again. But I realized that I can't just get into bed with this man. It was, we hadn't really known each other, and I didn't trust him. And
Yeah.
trust for me was huge. And so, when
Yep.
you talk about obstacles, there's so many things that prevent us from being completely free with a partner, from experiencing full pleasure. And
Yeah.
so that story just came up in my head because I was excited about trying out a new way to
Yeah.
experience sexual pleasure. Tantra is a great practice that I didn't know a whole lot about. He actually sent me a book to study it and everything. But we ended up not talking again after that experience of not
Wow.
meeting. So it was pretty clear that this was not something that was going to be healthy for me in my, exploration after
Yeah.
divorce.
If we don't feel a sense of trust with the person we're with, it's going to be very challenging for us as women to really drop as deeply as we possibly can into what's available to us in terms of our orgasmic capacity and our ability to feel more connection. And that was a big problem that I had in my marriage. There were a lot of other factors obviously going on that kind of led to the sexlessness. And some of it was I wasn't really able to trust my partner with my emotions. I couldn't really open. And so I stuffed it all down, and that led to depression, like deep depression and anxiety. And so because I was so shut down in that regard, and I didn't have that emotional trust in the relationship, my sexuality went right out the window with it. Yet I still had a longing, like I still wanted that. So the first piece that I learned when I went on my whole sexual self-discovery was that trust really begins within ourself, with our own body, of really learning how to listen to what's happening and notice what's happening in our own body first and foremost, and then trusting that, valuing it enough to then honor it and or communicate it if appropriate. And I know that you talked about a lot of these patterns that we choose our partners, and obviously that has a lot to do with our attachment style and our upbringing. I see this happen. I know this happened for me, but I see it happen for a lot of women, is that we shut down our receiving channels. We believe we're not worthy to receive, or we're supposed to be givers, or we're supposed to not feel anything negative. You can only smile, don't feel angry, don't feel sad, be nice. So if you're shutting down anger and grief, you're also shutting down pleasure and joy and excitement. So we become sort of very neutered or neutralized and really disconnected from our own internal sense of what's going on in the name of service to others, in the name of being caretakers, in the name of being good women and good little girls. So when there's that disconnect, we're not even able to, first of all, notice what's happening internally. So that's the first piece of building that trust is, what am I feeling right now? What am I noticing? So it could be a sensation, it could be an emotion, it could be a thought, but what am I actually noticing happening within my own body right now? When I started on those self pleasure dates, the first thing I noticed was I feel numb, which was weird because, like I said, I had lots of orgasms. That was fine. And, slam bam, thank you, ma'am, was all over within probably 5 or 10 minutes, but I could still have lots of orgasms that time. But it was still like really interesting to me that when I really slowed down, I started to notice I didn't feel much. And when I stayed with that, I don't feel much, and I trusted it. That's the next piece. I trust myself. I trust my body. I trust what's happening. Okay, there's numbness. I'm going to just be with that. The next thing that happened was I got really frustrated. I got really frustrated that I couldn't feel. And then I got really angry. And then suddenly I just had massive amounts of grief and sadness that was just pouring out of my heart. So that's no longer numb. Now there's feeling happening. And then what happened was I started to have actual more sensation and sensitivity in my genitals once I was able to just kind of be with that. I trusted what I was feeling. So for women in particular, that first step of trust is, can you trust your own body? And can you trust your own emotions? And can you trust the emotions that we tend to label as like negative, right? Like sadness or anger or guilt, a lot of guilt and shame that a lot of women have around self-pleasure and touching themselves. And can we be with that and learn how to give to ourselves, learn how to receive deeply within ourselves? Then we can look at, in a relational space, then I can feel myself deeply enough to know, what do I feel right now in the presence of this other person? Am I feeling safe? Am I feeling trusting? Am I feeling a little unsure that this is really a spot I want to be? Do I know what my body needs? Is there something I would need to, in order to feel safe, that I could ask for within the relational setting? So that's the next piece of how we build trust, is through that communication and through the creation of clarity. So a lot of the work I do with couples, and I lead couples immersions and retreats, that's a lot of what we do, is building those skills of being able to identify those things, noticing what the body's saying, what do I want, what do I need? And then relationally, how do we negotiate that space between, so that there's clarity? And when there's clarity, that's where connection lives. And when there's safety and trust, and that's what we do. We learn how to actually build the skills for that, which then the sky is the limit in terms of what we want to create sexually with somebody. That's about 10 steps down the line. We first have to build those skills of noticing, valuing, trusting, and then the communicating, and then the clarity. So a simple way to put that might be like the 3 N's: noticing. I notice what's happening, I name it, and then we work on negotiating the experience that we're going to have, whether that's sexual or otherwise.
Thank you for clarifying how we work through in our bodies these emotions that we hold in. And it's such important work. So many of us have been told that anger is bad and we should move through these hard feelings really quickly, which means that we actually don't work through them at all, and we hold them in our bodies. And I had Joan Rosenberg on the show. She believes in this 90-second method of feeling fully all of the feelings that you want to avoid for 90 seconds. Feel them in your body, let them become bigger so that you actually can work it out. I mean, 90 seconds sounds like a short time, but when you're feeling anger or pain or grief for 90 seconds, it can feel really uncomfortable. But what she found is that when you fully feel it, you move through it. You don't hold on to it. I think this is one of the biggest issues for people in general, but women, I think men also were programmed not to feel certain feelings, not to cry, not to feel sadness, right? And so there's shame, there's all kinds of things that show up in the bedroom when you don't work them out. So I love that. And I love the 3 N's: notice it, name it, and negotiate the experience.
I love what you said. I love, gosh, if you can even give 90 seconds to something and really go into it, that's better than not giving it anything at all and shoving it down. And when I say remove, yeah, I think that in a certain way that's even almost misleading, because all it is the full embrace of exactly what's there. And it's going to be ugly at first for most of us. It's not going to be like the joy and the happy. It's going to be like, oh, like all that stuff that I couldn't feel for whatever reason, or wasn't safe to feel, or didn't want to feel. Like that's all the stuff that comes out. And for women's sexuality and for orgasm and arousal, and really being able to access these depths, like what I was seeking was like I wanted to have these full body orgasmic experiences. To have that kind of stuff happen, it happens actually through the emotions. It actually happens through full embrace of that, because our libido is correlated, it's tied into all of the emotions, not just the happy ones, but the anger, the hatred, the sorrow, the pain, the grief, the loss, and the joy, the pleasure, the excitement. All of that is an aspect of our libido and our sexual energy. And when we say yes to that, that's where it starts to shift, right? That's where it begins to change. So for me, it went from numbness to anger to grief, and then into immense pleasure and full body orgasm. Like that was the path. And how I did that was just through that presencing in my body.
Yeah. And, what came up for me as you're saying that is why makeup sex is so powerful, because people go from extreme anger and resentment to pleasure, right? It's just like, oh, interesting.
That's an interesting one. Yeah, I just had someone on, I have a podcast series as well, called Sex Talk Café, and I had a woman researcher on there and I asked her about that. And allegedly what happens is that we get a massive release of dopamine and then oxytocin. So that's why it feels so good. Like when you break up, it feels terrible. You get all this dopamine let down. And then when you come back together, you get that bonding chemical that drops in. So that's sometimes why I think couples can get stuck in that pattern, because it's just we're victims also of our brain chemicals and all the hormones that are happening.
For sure.
Let's take a quick break to hear from our sponsors. This episode is brought to you by Amazon Music Unlimited. You can listen to over 70 million songs and thousands of playlists and stations. Plus, you can now stream your favorite podcasts, like Last First Date Radio. You can listen to any song, anytime, anywhere, on any of your devices. Get Amazon Music Unlimited for free for 30 days. Just head on over to getamazonmusic.com/lastfirstdate to learn more and claim this offer.
All right, let's talk about low sex drive and why it's a myth.
Yes, low sex drive. Well, so yeah, I think that even a better way to frame that would be sort of mismatched libido. Like I think that tends to be how that shows up for more couples. I think the low sex drive, I've worked on that side of it, on the women's side of it, because that was me. And I found my way out of that. When I finally came into my own, I left that marriage, my sex drive came back online full force. So there's this idea, the myth of low sex drive. I think that women tend to get painted into a corner with that, of like this idea that women don't enjoy sex as much as men, or they don't want sex as much as men. And a lot of the couples that I work with, it tends to be the female partner that is generally labeled as the low desire partner. And a lot of times what I see is she feels like it's on her to increase her sex drive to match her partner's drive. So we have this idea that the lower desire partner needs to somehow increase in order to match the higher desire partner. Or sometimes it happens reverse, where the labeled higher desire partner feels like they have to tamp it down. They have to shove their desires, not speak them, keep it under wraps. It's too much. Neither of these strategies are a good idea, and it's also inaccurate. What's actually happening is there's a few things going on. The first piece of it really is like your arousal map. We're wired differently. We have different ways that our bodies become aroused and turned on. And a lot of times what I see happening is we're very programmed when we hear the word sex, sexuality and sex, let's have sex. It's very limited to what tends to work for people who are more turned on by like direct genital stimulation and going straight to what we consider sexual acts like penetration or oral sex, like or going down on your partner, giving a hand job, going straight for the genitals. And that does not work. All of our arousal maps, we have different maps. So there's some of us who are wired differently, where we actually need like way more spaciousness and a little bit more teasing and a little bit more of an obstacle between myself and my lover. Those are the things that get them turned on to desire let's say, genital touch. And some of us don't have a huge desire for genital interaction at all. So that's the first piece, is like, how are we wired? What's our arousal map? And the next piece then is, so if you have a couple and they're both wired a little bit differently, how do you bridge that gap? Where I see a lot of couples get stuck is they just sort of, oh, he doesn't want it, she doesn't want it, so let's call the whole thing off. So nobody's getting what they want, right? Or he wants that and I don't want to give it because I want this thing, and blah blah blah, right? We get stuck in, they don't want the same thing at the same time, and then they just kind of hit a roadblock, and end of the story. That doesn't have to be the end of the story. And that's really where, when I work with couples, what I'm teaching them is what's actually going on there is there's just a lack of clarity. There's a lack of understanding, whose desire are we following? Who is it for? And if I'm following my partner's desire, then I'm going to be just sort of putting my desire right here for a minute. I'm going to set it sort of aside, and I'm going to be in a state of, am I willing to provide this for my partner right now? Yes, no, or maybe. So that's where that negotiating part comes in. I said the 3 N's: noticing what you want, naming it, and then the negotiating of it is actually another skill set in and of itself. So if I'm going to follow my partner's desire, then I'm going to get really curious about, what does he want? How does he want me to touch him for his pleasure? And inside of that, it might not also be my desire at that exact same time, but that's okay, because if I'm willing with a full heart to provide that thing for him, or maybe we make a little tweaks, right? Maybe I'm willing to do like 80% of it, and the other 20%, can we figure out something else? We negotiate it so that I'm not violating myself. I'm not giving out of obligation just because I have to. I'm giving because, okay, I'm really willing to do that because that really makes you happy. So I'm not tolerating anymore. That goes away. And in that, I can give with a lot of joy, and I can find a lot of pleasure in the giving. And he gets to receive the thing that he really desires and wants. So both people are actually able to have joy, enjoyment, and pleasure. And there's clarity that's happening. It's no longer just sort of this, we don't really know what's happening, and both of us have to want it at the same time, or it's not going to work. No, it just rarely works that way. There's beautiful moments where that happens, but if you can understand the difference between wanting something and being willing to provide something, those are 2 different states of being. So that's a lot of what we work on, how you discern those 2 different states, so you can have that clarity and really negotiate sexual experiences that are mutually enjoyable.
Yeah, I think people don't understand their turn-ons well enough. And, you talk about your own pleasure dates. I think part of that is knowing, do you like to be teased? Do you like to go right to the orgasm? Do you want more exploration? Do you want to try new things? I remember having the Erotic Blueprint founders on my show many years ago. I've had them on twice. That to me was such an awakening of, wow, people have different ways of expressing sexual desire and feeling pleasure. And the more we know, the better we do, right? So if couples could communicate that it takes me a little longer, but I'm turned on, I think that there's a big difference. And I think the problem is that people just shut down. They just see each other through their own lens in general.
Yes.
I mean, this is a big communication gap in general with couples, is that if they love me, they would take out the trash. If they love me, they would read my mind. If they love me, they would bring me the right gifts on my birthday. And if we don't communicate, they don't know. They're expressing their love in the way that they think is the right way. And so I think, that the slow turn on is such an important piece of this whole puzzle for people.
Yeah, it can be. And I mean, that's why I say the whole mismatched desire, the low libido thing is it's really a myth. We have to change. I think we really need to change the conversation around it. We need to get out of this idea of high libido, low libido, because the fact is there's just we have different pathways to it. If we don't take the time to discover, what does my body need? What do I want? What do I enjoy? And then have a real time experience of having that received, no more, no less. A lot of times I see this a lot with women, especially, is they'll say, oh, I don't have any fantasies. No, you do. I promise you that you do. Many times for women, they're much more subtle than they tend to be for most men. And so we tend to think that, if it's not something really explicit and kind of wild and kinky, that I don't have fantasies. The fantasy might be, Just imagine your partner would come over while you're cooking and put his arms around you and give you a kiss on the neck. That's a fantasy. That's a thing that arises, a desire that arises from within us. Maybe there's some visual aspects to it as well, but that is a desire. That is a fantasy. And we tend to discount it as, oh, that's not enough. So we want to get away from qualifying our desires as either not big enough or too much. And we tend to do that one way or the other. That tends to happen. So the more that we can kind of find desire, find pleasure where it's already living, however small it is, and or however big it is, and we can just be with that and honor that. From there, the more that happens, the more we honor it within ourselves, and we have the experience relationally of that being celebrated and honored. From there, it actually can expand. And so that's kind of one of the ways that we work with someone who might label themselves as low libido or the lower desire partner is, can we help them? Let's find the pleasure where it already is, as small as that may be. And over time, if you just honor that again and again and again and again, pleasure will begin to expand. Desire will begin to expand because now it feels safe and more can start to come online and more can begin to live there. So we erase that conversation around this whole like high desire, low desire, in my opinion.
I love the way you explain it. And I think, it's a much more of a complex field than I think we give it credit for. And I see like some of the people I work with, sometimes they just talk too much. They become too familiar, right? We can tend to go into that direction sometimes when we're trying to protect our hearts, when we think we need to do just a little bit more. And then I see also women who I work with who want to make sure like this person will never leave them. They will never hurt them. They will be there no matter what. And yeah, that can definitely,
that doesn't work either.
No, there's no guarantee that this person is going to be your forever partner. And I think, so for people like that who really hesitate, have so many fears from the past that they want that guarantee. I don't want to have my heart broken again. Any advice for those people?
Yeah, right. Because, I know that's probably a lot of the listeners that we have here with your show, women who are dating. And well, first of all, as I know, through your story, Sandy, like we can't go around with a hardened heart. We can't walk around in the world with a wall up. That's just not going to draw love in. And how we do that is, first of all, I really am with you on the talking too much. When we're just talking it can be an avoidance mechanism. We go into talking because we're afraid to feel. And I think I see a lot of women do that too. It's a way of protecting our heart, keeping things safe, but we're also neutering it when we're just in talk. We're not deeply embodied in our hearts and in our yonis and our genitals, which is really where that feminine radiance, which is the most magnetic thing in the world to the opposite sex, is the energy that we have the potential capacity to embody as women. And that happens when our hearts are connected to our sexuality. And when we're soft on the outside, but strong on the inside, as in your beautiful Tootsie Pop story, which I'm sure your listeners are probably familiar with. But and how we do that is by really, again, it comes back to this capacity to notice. The world, relationships can be a very dangerous place. I mean, I've been through a lot myself, and as I know you have, and a lot of your listeners have. The way that we navigate that is through the capacity to really, what do I need? What are my needs? What am I feeling right now in this moment as I'm here with this person? And how can I be more present with that and say yes to that instead of trying to tamp it down and get rid of it? Even if it's like, wow, I'm feeling really anxious right now. What do I need? Okay, I can breathe. I can notice. I can ask for reassurance. If I'm feeling uncertain or insecure in the relationship, I can ask for encouragement and reassurance. I can do that. So learning how to identify what I need and then being able to actually give voice to that is one of the most powerful things that we can do. And you can never control what another person does or what decisions they make, but we do have control over what we choose to do with what we're noticing or feeling. Identifying it, giving voice to it. We learn how to meet the need. It can be met through the relationship as well, but it sure can't be met if we don't know we have it, number one, and it sure can't be met if we don't advocate for it to be met.
Very true. Most people have no idea what it is. I think that is something I learned when I started coaching school was, what are my values? What are my needs? What are my feelings? Like none of that was ever worked on, discussed, given
Yeah.
attention to, held as sacred, held as important. And I think that the more we can tap into that, it was shocking to me. Like I had no idea where to even begin. And that's really the place to begin is who are you? Who are you now? Because sometimes, we change over time, but I think the core of who we are is always the same. And the more we can express all of that for ourselves first, and then
Yeah.
for our partners, that way we don't give up. As Gabor Mate says, we don't trade authenticity for attachment. I think that is such
Yeah.
a beautiful thing.
I love that phrase. And I think you're just definitely spot on because I think what can happen, especially when there's anxiety or fear, when this is what I would offer to along these lines of like, how do you manage that when you're afraid of losing? So how are we operating? We're operating out of the fear that someone's going to leave us. If you look at your own behavior around that and how that makes you show up, a lot of times that will take us into inauthenticity, right? We're going to act, we're going to self-sacrifice or do things out of obligation. We're going to tolerate things that are red flags that are really never going to be a good thing if we're looking for a long-term relationship. And so if you can look at that and identify how you're showing up inside of fear, then you have a choice. Do I want to continue to show up that way? Or am I willing to really honor my core values? If my core value is, let's say, truth, that's one of my biggest values, but I'm seeing that I'm showing up in a way that's not authentic to that because let's say I'm afraid he's going to leave me, so I'm going to pretend that I like something that I don't. That's not operating out of my core value of truth. So it takes a lot of courage to do that. But our values, like you said, Sandy, you're right. Those are the things that are with us our whole life. And it's one thing to know what our values are. It's another thing to really live by them and in alignment with them. And again, I'm going to say this again and again, it comes back to that capacity to notice, to be in our bodies and to notice and to feel. And then the negotiating that relationally, how we do that, even in the face of, the fears that tend to come up. And there's lots of them, especially when it comes to sex and intimacy, of course.
Yeah, it's very vulnerable. It's probably one of the most vulnerable ways that we are in the world. And if you're confident within yourself, you're not relying on somebody else to validate your sexuality, to validate who you are. We need to learn to walk away from people who can't
Yeah,
fill our needs, who don't have the core values that we're looking for.
right.
I just want to pivot a little bit. If we take away the goal of
Yeah.
climaxing, what
Yeah.
is possible?
Oh my gosh, so much more is possible that you would never know is possible if you're only focused on the climax. And, my story too, like I said, I could have lots of climaxes, but there was like this depth was missing. So if the goal was just to have as many climaxes as I could have, there was a real emptiness in that. So that happened for me. And then you're right. A lot of people do think it's all about what's the point of sex? If the sex is to have the orgasm. I'd like to make a clarification between climax and orgasm. I think that there's a difference between climax and then there's many different types of orgasm that we can experience. Even men can experience many different types, but we generally tend to be locked into just the one thing, the one kind that we call orgasm. But there's
Mm.
many different ways that our bodies can experience orgasm. G-spot orgasm, cervical orgasm, heart orgasm, brain orgasm, full body orgasm. So I like to think of like orgasm or like orgasmic. There's a difference between the event of orgasm or even a type of orgasm and then being orgasmic. As women, to become orgasmic, it's really about our ability to feel deeply and to feel and to respond to pleasure, to stimulus. That's orgasmic. And from that, the sky is the limit. If we have that understanding of orgasm as a state of being rather than a thing that happens in time or space, like an event, orgasm, that's a climax. So I like to kind of call that climax. And orgasm is just it's a whole way of being potentially.
I appreciate that you clarified the difference because I think people focus on climaxing as the goal.
Yeah.
And you're saying we actually can reach orgasmic potential in many different ways. But the question was, why focusing on climax as the goal of sex can detract from reaching your orgasmic potential.
That focus on the goal creates that is an obstacle. That's actually one of the obstacles to deeper connection and more orgasmic experiences. We get one pointed focus on getting to an end game, and then we're actually no longer in the present moment. So one of the things that couples can do is focus on what if you were just to shift the game around a little bit, and the goal is no longer to get to the finish line. What if you just didn't finish? What if you played with that? Nobody finishes. This is like a radical idea for a lot of people, and I understand that, but I will tell you, it just if you experiment with it, you will potentially open up the gateway to a whole new universe of experiences that are available when we're no longer trying to get somewhere, when we're learning how to just feel. Well, so what you do instead, you feel what's happening in the moment. So what is my body feeling right now? What sensations am I noticing right here and right now? And when do I get sort of future focused on climax? Can I pull myself back to the here and now? Can I just delay that for a minute and come back here to this present moment instead of trying to make it happen and get there? What if I just relaxed, slowed down, breathed more deeply, and just focused on sensations happening in my body? So the whole playing field now is it's a completely different ball game. And inside of that, a lot more there's just an expanded potential for new experiences because we're not any longer on this one pointed track of like, got to get to that thing down there. It's like all these other possibilities eventually will open to us. And that's just a matter of changing our approach to lovemaking and having a different approach to it that might be really new and radical for a lot of people. But what I know from my experience is, man, I've had some really amazing types of orgasmic experiences and deeper feelings of connection and love than what I was able to experience when I was just focused on genitally like getting off, so to speak.
What you're saying applies to all of life, that we focus on end goals way too much and we forget to enjoy the journey. And I think both are important, but enjoying the journey is really the key to happiness. And I think that I remember the book Happier by Tal Ben-Shahar that I read many years ago. He called the people who just chase goals rat racers. You know, they're never happy at the end of the goal because they got to reach the next goal. And so when you're not just a rat racer, but you're a person who enjoys the journey, you're not going to be disappointed if you don't reach orgasm. You're not going to feel that it was a failure or wonder what's next, but be able to savor the moment. So I love the focus on just feeling what's present.
Yeah, we can call them the rose smellers. You got the rat racers and the rose smellers.
That's good.
The roses. And yeah, I think it is important as we change and our bodies change as we get older into menopause and beyond, and same for men. There is a lot of ED out there. There's a lot of solutions, though, honestly, for that. It's not medical. You don't have to do the blue pill. There's a lot of stuff out there that men can do for that. But nonetheless, the truth is that there are so many other ways to come together and to connect that doesn't even really have to involve penetration. There is a technique that I teach called soft penetration, which is a total game changer and a great thing to know about to have in your sexual toolkit, no matter what stage of life you're in. Soft penetration is amazing because you don't need an erection to connect sexually and genitally. You can connect without an erection, and there can be a lot of orgasmic potential just inside of that when you learn how to actually have a more relaxed approach where an erection isn't necessary. So there's a lot of options out there. We don't need to be so constrained in this obsession with a hard penis, an erection. We need to expand what's available to us as human beings, especially when it comes to sex.
I'm sure a lot of people are going to want to know more about softer penetration. But before we go, I wanted to ask you what I ask everyone, which is, what are your final words of advice for anyone who wants to go on their last first date?
I love this question. And I really feel someone that took a while myself to really find my person and went on lots of first dates. I totally get the frustration that can happen. And I know for me, it's really about the values and living those values, being true to those values. So my advice would be to really identify what your values are and look at your life and make sure that you're bringing that thing. If truth is a value, that's one of my highest values. My goal then was to bring truth. I'm going to be responsible for bringing truth into every situation and into every relationship that I'm a part of. Because you know what? Truth has a way of weeding out all the wrong ones. And then when the right one shows up, that value, you're living it, and you attract someone who meets that. And those are the most important things. That's what makes a relationship last and something you can really build on over time.
I love that. Back to the values. And when you show up authentically with your core values and you don't tolerate people who can't meet you where you are, it's not like they're bad people. They're just not your people. And what we tend to do is we tend to take the wrong people and try to make them into the right people. And that just doesn't work, ladies and gentlemen. Susan, this was a great conversation. I would love for you to let people know how they can find you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Sandy. The best spot would be at pleasurekeys.com. I have a free resource for your listeners there that will help them with a lot of the stuff that we talked about today of how to get to some of those places of deeper connection, learning how to notice, letting go of orgasm is the goal. There's a great resource they can download called the Pleasure Keys. So that's at pleasurekeys.com, and that's really the best way to connect with me.
Awesome. And we'll have all your other links in the show notes. Thank you so much, Susan. This was just a beautiful conversation about such an important topic. I think that people misunderstand so many of the things we talked about today. So hopefully we've brought some clarity and hope to a lot of people out there.
Thank you, Sandy, for the beautiful work you're doing. It's really been lovely to be with you today. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And thanks everybody for listening. If you love our show, please give us a high rating on Apple Podcasts and a review, and share the podcast with your friends so we can keep going. We're entering our 12th season. And as always, here's to your last first date.
If you are ready to get unstuck, gain new tools, become more empowered, and finally find your last first date, I'd love to talk to you. Fill out an application to be considered for a complimentary half-hour love breakthrough session at lastfirstdate.com/application.